Hi, it's Sabina Rolick, Dr. Real Estate here with Berkshire Hathaway Home Services Chicago. And today I'm so excited to introduce you to Jim Pesavento. He is a new construction liaison, and I got to meet him a little over a year ago when I became a new construction specialist. So I've invited him here to come today and talk about the process of getting new construction. Hey, Jim, how are you?
I'm real good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm so glad to have you. I know I have a lot of clients who are really interested in getting new construction. In our current market where there's not a lot of inventory, especially at the higher price points, over 500, over 600, over 700, there's just not a lot of great choice, or some of the choices are really outdated and not meeting today's standards of what buyers are looking for. New construction seems like a fabulous option for them. And so I wanted to bring you here to talk about how you help buyers with the new construction process.
Sure.
Yeah. So can you first talk about your background, and your company, Proposed Properties?
Well, I've been a custom builder 25 years. Also licensed as a real estate agent and a managing broker for 17 years. I was also in the mortgage business for a while. So, what I've noticed in all those years is that all these businesses are very, very fragmented, right? So you have lenders, you have realtors, you have builders, you have consumers, and there's really no platform that brings everybody together. And really, this is all about the buyer and making sure that they get what they want, where they want, at the price point that they want. And right now, that's really not how new construction works. Builders and developers build homes, and when it's all said and done, it's either a fit for a consumer or it's not. But they're the ones that are actually building the home and buying the home. So what we've done is we've built an entire process around the consumer, around their budget, their family, their needs, the type of home they need, special features it might need to have. We start our process with them, and then we bring in the product and the builders based on that discovery session that we have with those consumers. And that's really what's going to give them a customized product and make sure when it's all said and done, it's in the price point that they want to be at.
That's awesome, because I think people have so many questions about new construction. And I know when I meet with my buyers, I do my best to answer a lot of those questions, especially going through the new construction specialist training. But I think when we meet with you, it adds a whole deeper level to help them understand the process and what they need, and then for them to share with you what they're looking for, and for you to talk to them about, what can work, what type of lots or properties that they need. Can you talk a little bit about that process? What happens in your discovery session?
Sure. It's part educational and it's part discovery and getting answers to some questions. So we start out by explaining the timing and the costs, because a lot of people think when it comes to the cost, it's just the house and the lot. Well, really, we have all these other variables that come into play. We call the soft costs, kind of that gray area of permits and utility connections and things like that. So we want to make sure they have a really good understanding of all the pieces that make up the true cost, as well as an idea of how this is going to time out, right? Especially in the Chicagoland market, it's going to take a little bit longer due to weather. And there's permitting in the process, planning and development, and then, of course, the build itself. So we walk them through all the different stages so they understand what it's all about, and they can say, hey, this makes sense for me, or it doesn't make sense for me. And of course, if it does, then we can do a little bit deeper of a dive on who's going to live in the home, any special needs they have, any special requirements they'd like in the home, whether it's a feature or something specific like a ventilation system because somebody has allergies, something along those lines. We really find out what they need in a home. And then from there, the ending, so to speak, is really when everybody kind of breaks with whatever their game plan is to help get the client what they need. So at that point in time, somebody like yourself would work with them on finding the right lot. And we would bring in builders and floor plans. And we would have one of our lender partners take care of the pre-approval. So that part is lined up. So really, you got an entire team that's out there if you want to move forward to support this effort and bring the consumer everything they need to make an intelligent decision about whether or not it's right for them.
Oh, I think that's awesome. I think that's really important. So it's really like this kind of holistic team effort. And I'm so glad you mentioned the lender piece, because not every lender does new construction.
Right. Very, very few of them do new construction. and even a smaller percentage of them do it well. It tends to be a very ancillary product that's just kind of part of their menu, so to speak.
Mhm.
But if you find a lender who does it well, they'll be able to close on actually the land and the build up front and secure interest rates not only through the build, but for the 20, 30-year mortgage afterwards. And in a rising rate environment like we're in now, that's a big deal because nobody wants to build a home and find out a year from now they're stuck at 5% when they could have locked in today's rate in advance.
Mhm. Oh yeah, no, that's a great point. That's really important because again, most people don't know that and they think they're just going to go to their regular lender, but the regular lender doesn't really usually do this kind of process. So, and that's an important part of the timeline, figuring that piece out.
And you mentioned something important, they don't know. In new construction, there's a whole lot of, you don't know what you don't know. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of resources to get that information because if you just talk to a typical builder, they're going to be offering their home.
Mhm.
Well, their home and their product might be a fit for your client, might not be a fit for your client. There's really not much of a due diligence process. And certainly the client doesn't have too much of a say on whether or not that builder, that home, that building method, those materials really are optimal for what they're trying to do. So, having this piece to kind of act as a facilitator and find out what's important to your customer, your client, and then bring in all the surrounding people, the whole team, and make it really all about them. That's really the way it should be all along, right? Unfortunately, I think we've been building homes backwards for the last 40, 50 years. We've all been just building homes and just saying, hey, that's the output.
Yep.
Maybe it matches a customer, maybe it doesn't match a customer.
Mhm.
But this is really, like the word you used, holistic. It's really more of a holistic approach where you're saying, all right, let's find out what's important to the consumer. Let's bring in all the different pieces and then bring them transparency, choice, and knowledge so they have all the tools they need to make good decisions, decide if it's right for them. And if so, do so and get the best product at the best price when it's all said and done.
That's awesome because yes, you're right. When there's a builder, usually they have their house and maybe the buyer can choose some finishes or carpet or hardwood floors and things like that, but they don't really want to deviate on the layout or they don't want to change the materials, as you said. So I think it's great. Even when there is a listing with a builder, often you can just buy the lot from them as well. And I think that that's an option that people don't realize. They feel like they might have to be stuck with that builder. And I know I personally, when I'm working with my buyers, say, by the way, I can always ask for the price of just the lot so that we could choose to work with a different builder instead. I think I'd love for you to talk about the builder piece in the process, because I think people feel like they might be stuck with a builder or they don't know a builder, they don't know where to go, and they've heard horror stories about builders. So can you tell me a little bit about the builder process?
Sure. Well, our process really entails helping the client find the right lot and then bring the right builder. And the reason why I say it that way is because whether you know it or not, whoever controls the dirt controls the deal, right? So if a builder owns a particular piece of land and they say, well, we're building this product, they're going to have control of what that product is. They might make it available to you to buy direct, but their chances are they're going to do it as a super premium because they're not getting their building job out of that opportunity, right? But what a lot of people fail to overlook is that there's tear downs and single family lots owned by everyday people on the market. And that provides an almost unlimited inventory of product to choose from for the land piece, right? So breaking out the land and the builder separately really gives you the ultimate freedom, right? Now you can pick the lot you want and the location you want at the price point you want with the features you want. And the same can be said for the builder. You don't have to accept a builder you don't want because they happen to have a lot that you're fond of or vice versa. So that really creates the ultimate flexibility. And that's where the coordination comes into play, right? It's not just a builder who owns a lot and produces a home. It's all right, we brought the team together. Let's find the perfect lot. Let's find the right model for the client. Let's find the builder who can produce what they want in the time frame they want with the materials they want. And everybody has to come together in order to make it happen. But when it's done properly, it absolutely benefits the client. Hands down, the best process they can go through for something like this.
And you give them a choice, right, of a few different builders.
Right. Yeah, I believe the last time we worked with one of your clients, they had a couple choices with a couple different builders. They interviewed them, they asked them questions. All of these builders are a little bit different, right? Some of them will give you a ton of variety in your selections. Other will say, you have to pick A, B, or C, right, when it comes to these selections. So that's why that discovery process is so important, because there's individuals who don't want to have a lot of choices. They want to say, give me A, B, C, I want to pick one. But there's other individuals that say, I want to walk into the tile shop and know I can put anything I want into my home in that tile shop. Well, those are two different builders, right? So that's why you got to start with the home buyer. You got to start with the client and build the process around them, because anything else, and you're really pushing that whole square peg round hole concept.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that makes perfect sense. And also in terms of when they imagine the house that they'd like, you don't want them to, go in blind into this process, say, this is the house I want, but have no conception of budget or what type of lot that house is going to fit. And so that's part of the discovery session as well, right?
Right. We try and start with the budget first, because you have to back out the land, you have to back out the soft costs, and the amount you have left is what you really have to build a home with, right? So that's the true dollar amount you can spend on roofing and lumber and drywall and all the things that go into building a home. And if you start the opposite way and you start with that plan, we've had some people just start with a plan and then bring it. Sometimes they can't find a builder who can build that home at that price point. Well, at that point in time, they've already invested in engineering, they've invested in architectural work, and it's very difficult to make the modifications. So having a builder in the process earlier to guide through the pricing piece is really, really important. I can't tell you how many plans I've seen personally and said, well, if we made this change and converted this to this, you'd save $4,000, you'd save $8,000. And sure enough, the clients will say, well, absolutely, I'm perfectly fine with that change, right? But those are conversations the builder needs to be a part of, not as much the architect. The architect is there to draw, and they're going to obviously produce what they want to produce, but it's not with the end cost to the consumer top of mind. Having that builder in the process earlier, make sure that the home is being designed within the financial means of the client, but also make sure there's that extra set of eyes to troubleshoot anything that may come up in the design process and make sure it stays on budget from day one, as opposed to scrambling to make it fit into budget on day 60 or 90.
Oh, that's always disappointing when you're having to do course corrections in the middle of the process and really stressed about that. And I would imagine every town has their different rules for setbacks, how wide the lots have to be, how deep the lots have to be relative to where the house placement is. And that's something that's also part of the discovery period, right? Kind of to advise the client and advise me as their realtor what to look for when choosing that vacant lot or that tear down property.
Correct. And all these municipalities have slight variances, but they have there's a list of things we're going to have to address, right? We got to get power to the property. We have to talk about it being on well and septic or sewer and water if they're public services, right? We have to talk about the setbacks, which vary by municipality, but there's some commonality there as far as setbacks on left, right, front, back, height requirements. All these things come into play. Right. And you have to have the outside eyes kind of looking in to make sure that that's all part of the conversation early. So there's no surprises, right? When there's no surprises and there's comfort in this process, it's a heck of a lot of fun. Right. But if you're kind of always getting sideswiped by things, that's when it's a different ballgame. And there's certainly some concerns, when you go into this process, if you don't have a handle on it. So really our intent is to make sure the consumer has a handle on it early. They understand the process. They're asking all the right questions. And overall, it becomes a good experience for them, because we found that most people actually have a really strong interest in looking into new construction. The latest survey they put out had 64% of all home buyers, interested in new construction. That's a huge number of people interested in it, but without a path to get there and without some guidance and some clarity on some fronts, it's pretty tough to just jump on in and do it. And if you don't jump on in and do it, well, then you're buying a current product, and that's okay too, but there's not a lot of inventory, and a lot of people feel like they're going to have to overprice for a home that's not ideal for them. They're going to have to overpay, which is actually really true in today's market. Really nice properties are going for above market. So, you have to be okay overpaying for a property and it possibly not being the greatest fit in the world. And for a lot of folks, they'd rather just say, hey, I'm okay if this takes 8 months, 10 months, a year. I want to get exactly what I want, and I don't want to overpay for anything. So for them, new construction makes a heck of a lot more sense.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And the worst is to overpay for a property, and like you said, it's not a perfect fit, and then they're spending money on the remodel to make
Right.
it what they want. And sometimes it's really hard to retrofit an older home for the way we live today. So, tiny
Right.
little closets, making them big, or, low ceilings when we like really higher ceilings today.
You can't fix those.
Basements are depending on the age of the property, the basements can be really shallow and you can't turn it into a recreation space or another usable space without excavating the bottom. I mean, the flooring, and that's so expensive. Whereas new construction, I love when I see new construction, you can see really nice deep basements that people can truly enjoy and use that space. So of course, it's always nice to use homes that are already built as well. But when you've got something specific in mind, it's really nice to be able to do the new construction.
Sure.
And so one thing you had mentioned was about vacant lots and about tear downs. Can you talk about the difference between the two?
Well, when it comes to vacant lots and tear downs, the perception has always been that a vacant lot is going to be a lot cheaper to work with. And if you ask somebody, they'd say, oh yeah, absolutely. I want a lot that's cleared and ready to go. What a lot of people aren't aware of is all the stormwater requirements and all the permitting requirements. So I'll give you an example. There's one of the clients we were working with, or the builders, I should say, he submitted 2 permits in a municipality here in the western suburbs of Chicago. And one permit was $399, and it was a tear down because the inspector had to come in, inspect the new meter, and that was it, right? It was a single function, and that's all they had to do. When they applied for the new construction for the vacant lot, the permit was almost $4,000. It was 10 times as much cost because you're adding a home to the grid, right? So if that sanitary department, for example, serviced 10,000 homes, well, when you were done, they were going to service 10,001 homes. So those are called impact fees. Typically, they're associated when you build on virgin ground that did not have a home prior. And those drive up the cost of building on a vacant lot. Whereas if you tear down a home and replace it, you're not having that impact, right? You're trading one home for one home. So your impact fees go away. So that's just one example. And there's about 8 or 9 categories you go through to say this is higher for a tear down, this is higher for a vacant lot. And you go back and forth. When it's all said and done, a lot of the time, those two come in pretty close to each other in terms of the cost. So I guess the moral of the story is don't overlook tear downs, right? Some of the best opportunities will be tear down properties. And in some cases, they'll be more cost effective to build on because of stormwater ordinances and the current impervious that the old home has that gets credited towards the new home and things like that. It can end up more cost effective to build on those than even vacant lots. So just make sure you include those in your search is the point.
Yes, I agree. That's great. And then that's also part of your discovery, talking about let's say if someone comes to your discovery meeting with some properties in mind, are you able to talk a little bit about them and those properties and say, okay, this is going to have these issues because it's a tear down in this neighborhood or this town versus, oh, this lot that you're talking about, that sort of thing?
Yeah, we typically do a pretty high level analysis of all the variables that are going to be part of that decisioning. The specifics come from the builder themselves, right? Because they're actually going to bring out their sewer and water contractor and have them give a specific number to connect to that water line based on it being across the street and one door down, or whatever the case happens to be, right? So there's a very specific part of the analysis that's typically done by the builder. That's going to be the dialing in on sewer and water and permits and all kinds of different things. But on a high level, we can certainly give them some counsel on the options that are in front of them so they can say, we want to pursue these 2 and we don't want to pursue these 3 or whatever the case happens to be. Because without that starting point, again, you're just kind of filling your way through the dark. And, the value that we really add is being able to give them guidance on that front as well as the builder front when that time comes.
Okay. And another thing, when you mentioned timeline and how long it takes, and I know people love to ask me that question, but it really depends also on the time of year, right?
Right. Yeah, it depends on,
that.
well, we got 3 different.
We live in lovely Illinois, Chicago, western suburbs.
Well, normally you have three different variables. In Chicago, you got the fourth, which is the weather, right? But really, you have a planning and development phase, which really is dictated by the client, right? If they find something they love in the architect's library, that could be a very quick affair. If they decide to customize and do all kinds of modifications, that can take months. So that's phase one. That's driven really by the client. Then you have the permitting, not uncommon at all for that to be 1 to 2 months to permit a project. That's really dictated by the municipality, right? Who's doing the actual review of the plans and the engineering. And then you have the final phase, which is the build itself. And one builder might say, I can build that home in 6 months, where another builder might say, I need 8. And to your point, weather comes into play in that phase. So you have 3 different phases of the process controlled by 3 different parties. And that's why it's so hard early for someone to just say, oh yeah, we'll have you in by this date, right? Because you don't really control all the variables. You got 3 different groups controlling the 3 stages. But when it's all said and done, you can usually give a pretty good estimate, but it's always good to have a little bit of breathing room in that time frame, just in case things go over for one of the several reasons we talked about here.
Yeah, because in the cold weather, right? I mean, when our ground freezes, you can't start the digging of the foundation, right?
Correct. Typically, it starts freezing as you get into December. When you get into January, sometime in January, you're going to get some frost there. In a good year, it might only go down an inch or 2 and you can still excavate. In a bad year, it could go down 12, 14, 16, 20 inches. Yes. Right? You get into that really nasty deep freeze.
Yes.
And then once you get into the deep freeze, it typically takes about an inch per day to thaw out with temperatures above freezing. So even when the spring comes along and the weather's better and you're above freezing, that doesn't mean you just dig. If you got a foot of frost down there, you might need to wait another 12 days for it to really thaw out properly. So it's one of those kind of game time decision things, which is why having a little bit of extra flexibility in the schedule is important.
So in some ways, like this time of year, it's November, would be a great time to perhaps start the process, because in terms of choosing the builder, choosing the house, the designs, starting the permit process, and then hopefully everything is in place in time for when the frost thaws. I mean, when the ground thaws. And
I think this is the perfect time of year to have to really think about whether or not this is something somebody wants to do. We do a lot of discovery sessions at this time of year. That's really when we kind of go through all these pieces and see if it's a good match for somebody. And it's also a great time to lot shop, right? So, you're not going in and out of houses. You're just looking at land, right? And it's typically one of the slowest months in real estate, really, is that November, December timeframe. So it's a great time to lot shop. You can buy things at a bit of a discount because things are slower. And then, of course, work on your plan, start your permitting process with the idea that if you can get all that done and you have a permit in your hand come spring, that's optimal. Now you're breaking ground in the spring, you're moving in the fall, and you haven't been subject to any of the adverse weather that we're used to getting here in our market.
Yeah, because like a lot of times people say, oh, I want to wait till the spring, I want to wait till the spring. And it's like, well, then you're wasting time, because then wasting precious perfect building time. I mean, of course, any time of year is great to start the process, whether new construction or buying a home, but people shouldn't be afraid to start the process in the winter time, since it just gives them that time to get ready. All those steps you laid out in advance to say talking to the builder, choosing the plans, and et cetera, and getting the permits, which of course we all know can take some time, and sometimes permitting and re-permitting, or sending permits in and then getting changes and doing it again, and that sort of thing. So, okay.
There's almost always changes, right? And it doesn't need to be something is wrong per se. More often than not, it's we want a detail on this, we want clarity on that, we want you to add this feature or this note or something like that. But very rarely do the plans go in and just pop out 4 weeks later with a stamp on them. They almost always want some additional clarity or some additional information on them. So although a review might only take 3 or 4 weeks, you got to be prepared to take notes, bring them back to the architect, have them make some slight modifications, and go in for your resubmit. And the resubmit will be a fraction of the time of the original review, because all they're looking is at those notes that got modified. They're not going through the entire process. But it's why we tell folks you should really look at more like a 6-week process instead of a 4-week process.
Okay. Okay. And I think once we talked about this and you thought it's great to work with, choose the builder first and let the builder be part of picking the architect, since builders have great relationships with architects already.
Yes, I would start with the discovery session, right? Let's find out if this is right for someone.
Yes.
If it's right for someone, then let's get a flavor of what they're looking to build. We can bring in a few builders that build a lot of that type of home, a lot of that type of product based on their needs and their timing and the features they want. And then from there, let that builder be a part of this final design budgeting process. So when it's all said and done, we're in lockstep every step of the way, as opposed to trying to pull pieces in, in the ninth hour before going into the permitting process or putting a shovel in there.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Like you said, start with the discovery session, because that's when everybody's, things that were important get brought up. At that point in time, people can learn from you what the process is and share with you what their goals are, because if without knowing their goals, you can't help them, guide them to the right place. Because of course, if someone says, oh, I need to be in a new home in 6 months from today, that's not going to happen. That's not realistic.
Right. That's a different conversation. Then it's, well, let's find something that's already in construction, right? Or let's find something that's already pre-existing, right? But that's why we have to have these conversations. We spoke to somebody just last night, and they wanted the builder to take them about 80% through the build, and they wanted to come in and do some of the finish work at the end. So, you have to find a special builder who's going to do that type of a thing, right? So all these situations are super unique, and really this process should start with your client and finding out exactly what they need, exactly what they want to do, and then draw the plan around that, as opposed to just building homes and plugging people into it, right? And that's kind of the beauty of the process, is it ends up exactly what the client wants every time, because it's built around them. And it also makes sure that all their questions are answered and they're comfortable.
And then they're happy, and nothing better than a happy client.
Absolutely. And they get in their new home.
Exactly.
And we know that new homes are going to run a little bit more than the average home on the market. But the real value of new construction is not the day you close on the house. The real value of new construction is when you fast forward 20 years. And say, in my new construction home, I've had to put in little, if anything. In my currently existing home, I had to do a roof, I had to do a kitchen, I had to do, then you say, all right, well, I bought the currently existing home for X dollars. In 20 years, I put 150,000 in. That's the number you compare to the new construction home. So that's the other kind of, perspective that I think new construction needs to have is, you're buying into the life cycle of a current home, and you are going to have repair and replace. Almost every year, you're going to have something, whether it's big, small, that you're going to have to contend with. Yes. And for the most part, all that goes away on new construction, which is why you really can't compare the price of one to the price of the other. You really have to say, hey, if I'm going to be in this home 10, 15, 20 years, what's my cost of ownership going new versus existing? And more often than not, they're pretty darn close to each other when you compare the two, because new doesn't have any of that repair replace challenge or cost in the first 10, 15, 20 years. And all of a sudden, it's looking like a pretty good value.
No, that's a great point, because that does freak some people out, scare some people. The sticker shock, like, oh, I could get something the same size for less. But yes, you're right. They're going to have to do a new roof, or they're going to have to do new mechanicals. They're going to have to do all those things at some point. So that is a really great way to look at it, thinking about, well, in 20 years, what's the cost of owning that? Oh, that's great. Okay. Wonderful. Did you have anything else that you wanted to share with people who are thinking about new construction?
I think the biggest thing is just check it out, right? Get all your questions answered and find out if it's right for you. So you can decide early, is this something I want to make part of my home search, or isn't it? And if it's not a fit, that's fine. If it is a fit, let's find out what we need to do to take the next steps. But I think the biggest thing is just don't forget it's out there, right? You can build what you want, where you want, at the price you want, if that's something that you desire to do because you have the time to do it. But it's all about setting up the discovery session first and just finding out, is this something that's feasible that you want to pursue, or isn't it? From there, everything kind of falls into place. But if you don't do that, it's kind of like the itch you don't scratch, right? You just got to find out if that makes sense for you first, because this is a big investment for folks. It's typically the biggest purchase that they ever make. And you don't want to overlook something that could be the best fit for you. And on the converse, you don't want to just jump into it and not know 100% what you're getting into. So it makes sense on every front just to start with that discovery session first and then build off of that.
And I have to say, there are a lot of realtors who don't know anything about new construction. So they don't advise their clients, or they don't inform their clients that that is an option. And that's why I was really happy to do the new construction specialist training, because I feel like when I have that buyer who's kind of on the fence of what they want, really wanting something newer, I can talk to them about new construction and start the process of explaining to them how it works. And then I get to talk about you and your company, Proposed Properties. And I share the link to your website, which I will include with this video. And so it gives them a feel for your company and what you do. And then I always encourage to do that discovery section, because I think new construction, it's not for everyone, but there are a lot of people, I think, who would really do well with it. And I think there aren't enough realtors out there who feel comfortable talking about new construction. So I'm really happy that I get to have that skill set to help my clients and give them, because my goal is always to give as many options as possible.
Sure. Yeah, and I'm glad you took that course. I think that's kind of like one of those game-changing courses. We talk about 2/3 of buyers, interested in new construction. It's pretty scary that less than 1% of the real estate agents out there have any new construction training.
Yeah.
Right. So, that's not a disconnect. I don't know what is. How does 2/3 of all our home buyers have an interest in something, and we have such a low percentage of agents who are really trained in that? So I'm sure that's going to serve you tremendously well as you move forward, having that information. But you're absolutely right. I think people are kind of hesitant to get too deep down the rabbit hole or answer questions or do those other things when they don't have a comfort level. And that really is a disservice to somebody looking to buy a home, to just rule out something like new construction across the board because the agent doesn't have a comfort level talking about it. Right. So, you did something about that. You got that certification, which is a big deal. And, you're able to have those conversations that a lot of other agents can't. And I think that's a great service to provide your clients, because you can be real objective and say, here's all the options on the table. Let's find out, what makes sense, what doesn't. And then we go ahead and we take it from there. And it provides the ultimate in choice and clarity for the buyer. And because ultimately it's their dollars, it's their home. This should be about them and what's best for them, and nothing less of that.
Exactly. Well, Jim, thank you so much for meeting with me today and sharing information about your company, Proposed Properties, and the process of new construction. I really appreciate it.
Well, it was our pleasure. It's always good talking to you.
Likewise. Thank you. Take care.